All right, you guys, we are going to do a recap from round number 12 of the Tata Steel chess tournament. Now, of course, going into this round, Magnus Carlsen holds a half-point lead over Richard Rapport. And so, very important round. Of course, Richard playing today against, I forget his name. Richard playing against what's his name? And, of course, Magnus playing against Fabiano. So, game starts out with e4. Obviously, Fabiano needs no introduction. He's played in quite a few world championship match. He played in one world championship match in 2018 against Magnus. Came up very close, just lost in the rapid portion. Otherwise, he would have been world champion. However, it does seem that Fabiano has been struggling quite a bit of late. So e4 is played, c5, knight to f3, knight to c6. Now here Fabiano plays bishop b5. Now this is the first surprise. Obviously Magnus can play anything. He can play e5 on move 1. He can play Sicilian. So I wouldn't really classify this as much of a surprise. However, Fabiano plays bishop b5 here, which is definitely a little bit of a surprise. In the World Championship match, Fabiano played d4, and after trades, knight f6, knight c3, pawn to e5, they had many duels in the Sveshnikov Sicilian after knight to b5, d6, knight to d5 takes, pawn takes, and Magnus tried knight b8. I think he tried knight e7. There's a lot of theory in these lines. If you're looking for a current game that was also played in Tata Steel, you could also check out the game played between Samuel Shanklin and Ramesh Babu Pragnananta from an earlier round. So Fabiano plays bishop b5, which is a little bit of a surprise. I think one thing that I've kind of been wondering about Fabiano of late is why is he suddenly not playing his main repertoire? I don't know if he's out of ideas, if he's just burned out, maybe he's trying to save them for the candidates. Really a little bit unclear, but it seems like he has not been playing principled lines throughout this event. And again, only Fabiano knows what the reason for that is, but I've definitely found it a little bit peculiar. So we have bishop b5, g6 played here by Magnus. Now castles, bishop g7, and c3. Now, as you will know, I have played Rook E1 against Magnus several times. We've drawn, I think, 2 or 3 times with this in the Sinkfield Cup and the FIDE World Rapid Championship in 2019 as well. So there are many different ways for white to play here. So in this game, we have pawn to c3, knight f6, Fabiano plays Rook E1 here, castles, and now we get pawn to d4. Pawn to d5 played by Magnus, e5, and knight to e4. Again, in many of these Ross Limo lines, black generally does try to play pawn to d5 and knight to e4 to counteract white getting this very big pawn chain from b2 to e5. Another example, just to show one other highlight of a situation where that can occur, is that if we go back here, let's just say you have a line like this, for example, trade castles, knight to c6, c3, e6, d4. There are many cases where you end up with a position like this, for example. So again, playing for d5 and knight e4 is a very common theme. All right, so back to the game. After knight to e4 is played, we have bishop e3. Now, it's worth noting, of course, if white could magically move this knight away, let's just say you could play some random moves like knight to h2 and knight to f1, for example, this would be very scary for black because now you're threatening f3 to trap the knight. So say bishop d7, f3. Knight has no squares here as both g3 and g5 are covered. However, as we look at this position, it's very hard for white to get those moves because in order to get that setup, you need h3, knight h2, knight f1. You need 3 moves while black doesn't do anything. And of course, there's a lot happening here in the center of the board, of course, with a lot of pressure on d4. So it's not realistic to expect the knight to get trapped on e4. So now we have bishop to e3, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. Now queen b6 played here by Magnus. And now we have queen e2 played by Fabiano. Idea to guard the bishop. Additionally, if you move the bishop away to, let's just say, a4, black can simply capture the pawn on b2. So queen e2 is a very nice dual function move. Protect the pawn on b2, and you protect the bishop on b5 here. So now we have bishop d7, bishop to a4, and now rook a8. Worth noting that in this position, a very common theme that you'll see out of these French and Caro-Kann situations is positions where you have bishops that are opposing on a4 and d7 or b5 and d7, where black has this nice tactic with, say, knight takes d4, bishop takes a4. Or, for example, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes a4. However, in this situation, because there is a bishop on e3, both of these tactical ideas do not work. If you play knight takes d4, white can play bishop takes d4 and you lose your queen. And if you play knight e5, I do not capture with the knight, I capture with the pawn. And now once again, when you take the bishop, I eat your queen on b6. So in this position, after bishop a4, rook a8 is played by Magnus. And now we have knight to c3, knight takes, pawn takes. And Magnus plays a very logical move here, which is queen to d8. Now the reason Magnus plays queen d8 is sort of multi-purpose. First of all, in this position, when you look at this pawn structure with c3 to e5, black would love to put the knight on c4. So for example, say we get some position with knight a5, bishop c2, knight c4. This is a great outpost for the knight. However, if you play knight a5 right away, I just take your bishop on d7. So you can't move the knight right away. So that's step one. You maybe want knight a5, knight c4. Additionally, if you get knight a5, you attack the pawn on c3. So you'd love to put the knight on a5, but you can't do it right away. Now, the second reason that queen d8 makes sense is that, of course, obviously it protects the bishop on d7 to prepare knight a5. But additionally, you can now move the queen away from threats along the b file. Say white goes rook b1. Very, very harmless. You can play pawn to b6 or even just knight a5 here. Same idea. Attack the pawn, offer the trade of bishops, try to go knight c4, and your queen guards the bishop. So it's a very multi-purpose move, which makes a lot of sense here. Remove the threats on the b file, guard the bishop, and prepare knight a5. So now we have bishop b3 here. Oh, and additionally, as chat points out, there is a fourth threat, which is there is also the idea of knight d4. After h3, you have knight d4 now, or knight to e5. Both of these tactics work because the queen is no longer under attack from the bishop on e3. So now we have bishop b3 played by Fabiano, knight to a5 played by Magnus, and here Fabiano plays a very interesting move. He chooses to play this move rook a c1. Now again, it's hard to judge what exactly Fabiano calculated or didn't calculate. For the computers, they actually think the bishop takes d5 is completely reasonable. And after bishop f5, you go back to b3, not pawn to c4, by the way, because then black can play e6, trapping the bishop here. You have no squares. And after bishop b3, black can now play the move rook takes c3. And computer actually says that after queen d2, knight takes b3, a takes b3, rook takes b3, rook a7. Black is maybe very marginally better, but white should be well within the range to draw this position. Again, very early in the game, obviously Fabiano tends to be a very ambitious player with the white pieces, and he wants no part of that. So instead he plays rook a c1, knight takes b3, a takes b3, queen to b6. Now Fabiano plays queen a2, guards the pawn. Not b4, by the way, because if you play b4, you actually create this very unfortunate, what we call a backwards pawn, where black can now play like rook c7, rook c8, and gang up and try to attack the base of the pawn chain. So you get queen. So instead of b4, we have queen a2 played by Fabiano to guard the pawn this way. a5 is played here. And now this is where the game gets really interesting. Fabiano here plays a move that in retrospect is, I think, the start of making mistakes and going in the wrong direction. Now one thing you'll notice when we take stock of the position is pawn structure is relatively fine for both sides, not a whole lot going on. However, black does have the bishop pair here, and in the long term, if black can open up the position, the bishops will become active. So here Fabiano plays queen a3. Now this is a very superficial move. It temporarily targets pawn at e7, but black can obviously easily defend it. What would have been a better choice is to play this move pawn to c4 here. And now after c4, the game gets very interesting. Black has to really make a tough choice. Does black want to take the pawn on c4 and let white's pawns connect? Does he want to play a move like pawn to a4, after which white can play something like rook b1, pawn takes, rook takes, and white should be, I mean, I don't know if white's better here. White definitely is not worse. So you have either a4, or you have, or another option you have is maybe to play pawn e6. However, after e6, white can now play this move c5, and after queen b5, you now go queen to d2, targeting the pawn at a5, but much more importantly, playing for bishop h6 and trying to create all these weak dark squares around the black king here without the fianchettoed bishop on g7. Fabiano, however, does not do this. Instead, he plays queen a3. Now, you probably wonder, well, what's the difference? The problem is now after rook f8, e8, c4, black does not have to play this move e6 here. And in fact, black decides to take. So now you get b takes c4, queen to a6. And you'll notice with the queen on a2 versus a3, it's very different. The reason it's different is because if we go back here, let's back to this position. After queen a6 with the queen on a2, you're guarding the pawn. So now you can actually play d5 and just keep building this nice big pawn chain in the center, taking a lot of space here. And the computer actually thinks white is much better. Not even just a little bit better, but outright much, much better. It says about +1. So back to the game. After queen a3, rook f8, c4, what's happened? Well, first of all, not only does queen a6 attack the pawn, but you've also given black an extra tempo with rook e8, which in the long term could be very useful for ideas like e6 and bishop f8 to redeploy the bishop to another diagonal. So after queen a6 is played here, Fabiano plays c5. Now this is a very committal move, but already it feels very difficult for Fabiano to play, primarily because in this position you ideally want to keep the pawns intact. You want to push for d5 and build that sort of semi-chain with c4, d5, and e5. But if you play queen to a2 now, black can play pawn to b5, and the real issue here is if you trade the pawns on b5, after bishop takes b5, black now has an outside pawn. And these pawns in the center, they really aren't able to march up the board easily. There's like ideas like bishop c4 and d5, and this bishop on e3 also is not very good. So black is in trouble. Or white is in trouble, I should say. So back to this position, c5 is played here instead by Fabiano, but this is also very committal because now after bishop to c6, you'll notice that in this position, the bishop is going to d5, and the pawns are kind of blockaded here. So I would say already at this point, I was feeling very uncomfortable for Fabiano during my live coverage of the round on Twitch. So Rook B1 is played here, A4 by Magnus. Again, Rook FC1 here, and already it doesn't feel like white has an idea. This bishop on C6 is really, really well placed. The pawn on B7 guards it. It guards the pawn on A4, and you feel like these pawns in the center long term are going to become brittle because at some point, I'm just going to make some random moves. Say you play H3 here. After F6, pawn takes, bishop takes. You'll notice that there's a little bit of an issue with these pawns, and the diagonals are opening up for the black bishops on c6 and f6. So it is actually completely fine here, but already as a human you start to worry about the long-term issues and you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. So here we have Rook E to c1, which is played by Fabiano. Rook d8 played by Magnus. Very logical move, tries to put pressure here, prepares f6 to open up the diagonal and put pressure on the pawn on d4. Knight d2 is played here, and now we have queen to e2. And this is where it's already starting to spin a little bit out of control, but Fabiano makes a critical blunder. So here, the move that the computer recommends is Rook E1. But again, after a move like Queen H5 here, followed by F6, I already feel like this position is better for black. I don't know if Magnus would have necessarily won the game, but it already feels very unpleasant because this bishop on C6 is great. Black is going to open the other diagonal for the dark square bishop. And again, a lot of pressure towards D4. Long term, also ideas towards the pawn on G2. Instead of playing Rook E1, Fabiano chooses to play the move pawn F3. And now Magnus shows once again with pure class why he is the best player in the world. He instantly plays this move Rook takes D4. Doesn't think for more than 20 seconds. He just snaps the pawn. And the reason that I say that I really am impressed by this move is not just because it's a good move, but the fact that Magnus plays it instantly. He does not take 10 or 20 minutes to calculate it. He just instantly sacks the material, and he understands that after bishop d4, queen d2, in the long run, this bishop on c6 and this pawn on a4 are going to be worth a lot more than this rook on b1, and there also are weaknesses on c5 and e5. So now we get rook d1, queen to f4, queen to b4, and Magnus plays e6. Now you might wonder, well, why am I so impressed? Why is this such a big deal? The reason this is such a big deal is essentially in this position, black has a bishop on c6 and a pawn on a4 for the rook on b1. Rook on b1 looks nice, but there are no real threats. The bishop guards the pawn guards the bishop. Beyond that, black can also go rook a8 with ideas of a3 and a2 to force this pass pawn up the board. And meanwhile, you also have weaknesses on c5 and e5. These two pawns long term can become very weak. So rook a8, a3, a2 is one idea. You have the two pawn weaknesses. And then you have a third problem, which is that black can also start to try and play on the other side with g5, g4, and open up this light square diagonal towards the king on g1. So there are three problems here. As we say in the game of chess, generally if there are two weaknesses or two issues in the position, that's already too much. If there's one, generally you can defend, but if there are two or more, you're in a lot of trouble. So we have bishop c3 being played here by Fabiano. Queen takes b4, and now Fabiano trades. Now in retrospect, this actually just loses the game on the spot. A better try for Fabiano would have been something like rook d3, bishop takes e5, trade the bishops, and play something like rook d1. Try to use this open file for the two towers on d3 and d1, but in reality, this probably is also going to be losing long term. However, Fabiano plays bishop c3 instead, and this just loses without much of a fight, because after queen b4, bishop takes b4, first of all, Magnus captures a second pawn, so now he has a bishop and two pawns for the rook. Additionally, the bishop on c6 still is really powerful, guards the pawn on b7 and the pawn on a4, and black can also now go for rook a8 and a3 long term as well. So now we get bishop a3 by Fabiano, trying to prevent the pawn push. Magnus goes bishop f6, king f2, bishop e7, and as you'll notice here, he plays rook b6, but the problem with the position is, again, you have no entry on this open file. The bishop on c6 covers d7, and the bishop on e7 covers d8. So even though you have the two towers are not very powerful here. So let's go back. So after rook b6, we have rook c8 being played by Magnus, rook to d2 played by Fabiano, and now we have pawn to f6 here. f4 is played by Fabiano, pawn to e5, pawn takes, and now you'll notice again, what is the issue for white? Well, black has the wide peepos, the e and the a pawns, which will be guarded by the bishop, and long term, you still have this third weakness on c5 as well, which is just too much to deal with. So now we have rook e2, rook to f8 played by Magnus, king to e1, and rook to f5. Again, rook on b6 looks really nice, but with the pawn on b7 guarding the bishop, this rook on b6 is doing nothing, so you're essentially lost. The game continues. Rook b1. Fabiano realizes nothing is happening on this half-open b file, tries to bring it to the open d file here. e4 is played, and now we have rook to c1. Bishop h4 played by Magnus. Fabiano goes g3. Again, very nice move by Magnus. By playing g3, he provokes another weakness here. You get bishop g5, and now there's also an infiltration on the f3 square, and you can start to push the a pawn down the board. If here white plays a move like king to d1, for example, now black can play the very nasty move bishop to b5, and if you play rook takes e4 here, I can go rook to d5 check. King cannot go back to the e file, both squares are covered. King to c2, and now I have bishop d3 skewering the king and the rook, and that's GG's. So back here, g3 is played. Now bishop to g5, again, bishop's guarding both the pawns, but you create the extra square for the rook to go to f3, because again, the pawn cannot go back to g2. Rook to b1 is played by Fabiano, and now Magnus plays rook to f3. Bishop to c1. You can try bishop b4, but if you go bishop b4, again, I have bishop b5. Bishop's covering the diagonal here, so say you play rook b2, I go rook f1 checkmate. King is stuck on e1, no squares. And if you play rook f2, I have the very nasty move, bishop to e3, and after rook f3, ef3, now the pawn is marching down the board as well, escorted by the two bishops from b5 and e3, and it's just simply lost for white. So after rook f3, Fabiano goes bishop c1. Magnus does not trade the bishops here. Now, of course, he could obviously trade and use the peepos to win the game, but instead he goes bishop f6, and he figures, you know what, just keep the two bishops on the board. They're very, very powerful, and you're just going to escort the a pawn up and win the game. We have rook b6 being played here by Fabiano. Rook f5 played by Magnus. Again, maybe not the absolute best move, but very thematic. Bishop to a3 to guard the pawn on c5. And now king to f7 is played by Magnus. Again, bishops are optimally placed. They're guarding both the diagonals here. Bishop on c6 towards h1, f6 towards a1. Rook to f2 here. By the way, one last point I would make is Fabiano cannot take on e6. So after pawn takes rook e4, you might think, wait, you're going to win the pawn at a4, and then you're very much back in the game. But black has rook to e5 here, and after rook takes, bishop takes, king e2, king e6, king d3, king d5. Simply winning for black because I'll be able to go after your pawn on c5. Say you play bishop b4, bishop f6, bishop a3, just bishop e7. And once I gobble the pawn on c5, then my a pawn starts running. And I have two mini peepos, which is still good enough to win the game. So after king f7, Fabiano plays rook f2. Magnus goes rook f3. Again, realizing that he can push this e-pawn further up the board. Now after rook takes, pawn takes, the bishop still is guarding this pawn. And these wide peepos on f3 and a4 are super wide split. Bishop on f6 is coming into d4, and the double op combo is overwhelming. King f1 is played here by Fabiano. And now after bishop to d4, played by Magnus, Fabiano resigns the game in view of the fact that after rook to b4, you do not capture on c5, because then I have rook f4, creating the check and winning the bishop on c5, but simply bishop to e3. And you have no way to remove this bishop here. You'll notice that you'd love to trade the bishop, but the c1 square is covered. And if you go like bishop to b2, for example, I just eat the pawn. Again, the double ops are covering all the diagonals, and this is very simply winning. And if you try to move the rook, I don't know where, like rook to b1, now I can simply just play, let's just say king e6 here, bring the king in, and if you go rook e1, again, I have bishop b5 check, and the double ops are crushing. So in this position, after bishop to d4 on move 49, played by Magnus, Fabiano resigns the game, and Magnus wins the Tata Steel tournament with an extra round to spare, because of course tomorrow Daniil Dubois will not be able to play him, so Magnus gets an automatic win. Very impressive game by Magnus played today, and this is one of the reasons that Magnus is so well known and so, I guess, revered for his late middle game and end game play, because in this game it felt like a very normal game, but at some point after the middle game, Fabiano just got completely blown off the board by Magnus, showed great understanding of the long-term ideas with the bishops, and of course the hammer was the exchange sacrifice with rook takes d4. Brilliant gameplay by Magnus. Again, can't really critique anything in this game, and that's why Magnus remains the best player in the world and very deservedly wins the Tata Steel Masters Chess Tournament. We have an interview.
The result in total, and also today, I was, draw was very good for me, but I was feeling a bit bolder than normal. I kind of wanted to play. He clearly wanted to play as well, so we got a good fight. But I think he went astray there. I went for a somewhat risky plan with all of this a4, rook d8, and so on, because I would have to spend some time at least with queen a8, queen c8, later getting the bishop back in the game, and it's a question whether he can use that time. And then I think he went for the wrong plan with knight d2 and then f3, and I felt that the exchange sack was just screaming to be played. After that,
how did you evaluate that?
Oh, I thought I was better, probably not much, but I think he immediately went for completely the wrong plan with queen b4 and bishop c3. I think it's very much in my interest to exchange queens there. Might seem a bit I cannot find the paradoxical that I should exchange queens while an exchange down, but I think my bishops are so strong in the end game that he just has no chance. So I think he needed to do something else there. Maybe queen b2 was a choice, and then try to play queen e2 maybe later if rook d8, bishop c3. Thought that was the only way to kind of stay afloat for him. And I feel like the end game was just winning pretty much from the get-go, and he found some nice resources, but I think eventually it's always going to win.
How would you sum up your tournament? Are you satisfied with your play?
I think there have been a lot of very good moments here in this tournament. I think I've had 9 winning positions, and I converted 5 of them, which is probably 1 or 2 too little, considering what I had. But there are a lot of positives, especially compared to the last couple of years where I didn't play well and frankly didn't get many chances. So the huge amount of chances that I got, it's of course partly due to my opponents playing a bit weaker than usual, but I think I also managed to create more of them than normal. And obviously the total score +5 is great and more than enough for tournament victory. But there's always this thought that it could have been even better. But that will have to be another time. But I'm really satisfied in general.
It's your 8th win here in the Masters. This is a nice collection of trophies. The 10 trophies are inside now.
Oh yes, for sure. As I said, I'm very happy to get back to winning ways here, and I also now got back to winning more than 50% of my A groups here, which is something that I'm kind of thinking of a bit the last year. I didn't want it to dip below, so if I do this the same thing next few years, then I have great chances.
And tomorrow is going to be a very odd day because you don't have to play. So you will have some mini holidays in Wijk aan Zee tomorrow. Do you have any plans?
Yeah, practically it will be my 5th free day. I don't have any particular plans. We'll see how I feel and go from there. But as I said yesterday, obviously you want things to be decided at the board. But I'm really happy that I got this win now, and then it doesn't really matter. I guess if I had lost and Schach had won tomorrow, then we could have been tied, but wouldn't have been very likely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and enjoy your victory.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so yeah, pretty standard interview. I mean, obviously played very, very well throughout the tournament and well deserved. But I would say the funny thing is, like, when he does talk about it, like, obviously it was a great result and it was a great win, but it is true that like being a little bit better, like he has to be a little bit better every single time if he really does want to get to 2900. Which is why it's actually really, really insane, and probably unlikely, because this result was a great result. I mean, an absolutely great result, and still he only gains 3 points. So it's like, that's the thing that I mean, the thing that I would say is that, like, there is a chance, but he's going to have to be that little bit better if 2900 is a realistic expectation. Is the one bit that I would say.
No, true.
But,
I mean, he had more chances to win, but for example, one of those chances was against Vidi, and that was just really one move. And
That's
also against
true.
Yesipenko, I mean, usually with Black he wouldn't get such a chance, right? I mean, Yesipenko felt like he made some weird moves, but I mean, games like against Jordan, where he could have won with one move in King E2, that definitely was a miss. And I mean, I guess he's also referring to the game against Niels. That was very up and down.
I mean,
so
I feel like
he will also need help from his opponents.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think overall, yeah, I mean, probably he should have won the game against Jordan. Neil's game, I mean, I feel like cuts both ways. At some point, I think he should have won that like 80-90%. But at the same time, Vita, I don't think he should have won that game. And for example, like today's game, probably objectively, I don't think he should have won this one either. So it all kind of balances out when all is said and done. That's sort of how to look at it, is what I would say. But I do think Esipenko, he probably would have won that game normally. He would have gone D4 in that game, and I think he would have won that in most cases. So again, it all kind of evens out. It all evens out. And also, actually, sorry, the ninth winning position was against Sam, which I would say was not really winning, except for like one brief moment in time.
No, but he was never winning against Sam, right?
I thought not. If you count 9, I think that was one of them, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, I was thinking he probably meant like the game against Yesipenko. So he missed 4, right? The game against Yesipenko, Jordan, Niels, and Vidit.
Right. That's only 4? Oh, right. So that equals 9. Okay, so never mind. So the game against Sam wasn't one of them. But yeah.
But of course, against Vidi, it was just one move, and it was really weird.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just one move. wasn't obvious. I mean, yeah, it's what it is. But yeah, that's kind of how it goes.